Jay.
Hi, hello. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Okay, I'm just trying to get everything set up. It looks like, I guess
Great.
the it looks like the screen is different on your end. Can you see the entire image? Hold on, I think I have to adjust some things.
No worries.
Can you see anything right now?
I can see you, and then
Okay.
I think most of the image, maybe not all of it. It's a
Okay, let
little
me just adjust some things.
okay.
Yeah, I just need to. Oh,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. Guess I've had trouble getting this easel set up properly for the.
No worries. Oh, there we go. Now we can see the whole thing.
Okay, let me just adjust. Is this video being recorded yet?
I think it is technically started, but they'll edit it out. Don't worry.
Oh, good. Okay.
I'll tell Michelle to make sure to not start it until we
Yeah,
actually.
there's some performance variable. You know, this worked beautifully just yesterday, but today, of course, there's something that.
Oh yes, that's always how it goes. I had that happen with an event last week where the microphone was working
Yes.
and
Okay.
then just stopped. And I was like, that's lovely.
Oh, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Oh yes. We had a live raffle drawing too, and that the second we clicked it, it reset itself. That was great.
Okay. Well, yeah. So we're going to be doing a 2-point of Villa Rotunda, and can you actually? I guess you're going to start letting people in.
Whenever you're ready, I will let them in. I'm just gonna wait until your go ahead.
Yes, I think we're ready.
Alrighty, then I'm gonna put myself off of video so that they just see you, and I'll let them in now. Alrighty, all set.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to class. This is our second lecture series in drawing perspectival drawings. This, of course, will be our section in 2-point perspectives. This is just kind of a block out of an image we're going to be drawing Villa Rotunda, of course, by the famous Renaissance architect Palladio. We're going to be doing some kind of warm-up perspective exercises first. I'm going to share my screen so that way you can see the image. So can everybody see the image of Villa Rotunda?
Yes, all good.
Okay, good. Yeah, it should be the full screen.
Yes, it is.
So this is a pretty dramatic 2-point perspective. In other words, I'm going to show you the main difference between 1 and 2-point perspectives, but this is a perfect example of how to properly draw a 2-point perspective. This is just a wonderful view of Palladio's Villa Rotunda. I'm going to stop. I just was going to have you look at this for a minute. And can you see my cursor on the screen?
Yes, you can.
Perfect. Okay. So, we talk about perspective, when you're actually in person sketching, in person on site, or you're sketching for yourself from a photograph, the first thing to establish is, of course, the horizon line, the viewpoint, the station point. So obviously the station point is we're standing here at the front of the corner of the building. So then the horizon line is actually the very top, your eye level is right at the top of the plinth, the top of the stairs, the base of where the columns begin. I don't know if that was really intended by Palladio, but it's a very wonderful kind of way to sort of begin the architecture, is that the colonnade starts at the top, of course, the base. Then I'm going to show you how to set up the 2 vanishing points, the left vanishing point here, then of course the right vanishing point, and then I'm going to show you to properly foreshorten some of these elements. Now again, this is one of the few views that you can only measure in the vertical image. You can't measure in, of course, the right or the left side. So I'm going to stop the screen for a second. Then I think you should be able to see. Hold on just a moment. Okay, so you should be able to see my drawing easel, right?
Yep, all set.
And this is full screen, right?
It is, yes.
Okay, so this is just obviously not the finished drawing. This is simply a block out of just the main essential parts of the perspective drawing of Villa Rotunda. And this particular view, the only drawback is, of course, we don't really see the round rotunda at the very top because we're standing so close to the building. So the actual rotunda, the round volume is way up here. We can sort of just show that first. The first I'm going to do is just show you some basic ideology of the perspective drawing. We saw 1 point, and this is really for, we're going to be showing plan views. You don't have to draw this in your sketchbook. This is just kind of a little precursor just to understand the nature, the difference between, of course, the 1 and the 2 points. So the 1 point is really, hopefully this is clear enough you can see me drawing, right? Is that clear enough?
Oh yes, yeah, we're all good.
Great. Okay, so the 1 point station point is in plan, here's an object or a space, you're standing in front, and of course there's something called the cone of vision, which is a roughly kind of a 30, 60, 45 degree angle. So that way, when you draw the perspective of the 1 point, obviously everything that's parallel goes to 1 point. We did that the last week. And of course, these are some principles established by Brunelleschi, the Renaissance architect that, of course, created the dome of the Cathedral of Florence. So in other words, the 1 point perspective, of course, the parallel lines do converge to 1 point. That's pretty easy. So we have our horizon line, which of course is the eye level, which is technically, this is called the station point, where you're standing. This is really how you view and perceive everything. So the same thing here, we're seeing the station point is right here, the center of course, this little box. The 2 point perspective is a little bit different because there's actually 2 points. Of course, to establish any sort of perspectival view, either drawing from a photograph or a perspective or a photograph, is that let me see if I can draw this. Okay, so the first thing to do is, of course, establish the horizon line. The horizon is, of course, where the vanishing points die into. And of course, it is the eye level of the person standing. So for a 2 point perspective, I just kind of arbitrarily locate the 2 points, the left vanishing point and the right. So then let's say if we wanted to draw a perspective 2 point of a small box, then of course, the right vanishing point would go back to there. So if you look closer to the bottom of the screen, is that the plan of that would be where your station point is. Let's say the object is technically rotated in this view. So you're actually, the station point is here. You're looking at the corner of the building. So then of course, when you establish the station point, looking at a corner, you have 2 points, one here, the right, and then of course one on the left. That's really the main difference between, of course, a 1 and a 2 point perspective. So one thing to establish is if you're drawing on site, it's easier to draw from a photograph because, of course, all the boundaries are established for you. But drawing in site is quite a bit different because you have to sort of imagine, like, if this is the plan of the object you're drawing, you don't have to, again, draw these in your sketchbook. I'm just kind of giving you some information about how you can sort of establish the proper vanishing points. So let's say if the object is here and you're standing very close to the building, the cone of vision is going to be very distorted. So in other words, if I were to draw this as the 2 point, here's a horizon with the vanishing points, then of course, the object is going to be very distorted. So look how terribly misforeshortened the left and the right side are just because you're standing way too close. So we're going to pull back and stand here. So that way the perspective image is more like this. So it's a lot more graceful. Hopefully that makes sense. When we start drawing the drawing of Villa Rotunda, you can do this, and I'm just kind of struck to this where it's, you know, any size of sheet of paper, doesn't matter, 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17. The larger ones, if you use a larger sheet size, it's easier to draw a 2-point perspective. I'm just used to drawing larger. So let's kind of go back to the basic block out. So the first thing to do in actually drawing the image is that, and let me share my screen again so we can take a look at the photograph, so I'll have committed to visual memory. So I think you can see the image of Villa Rotunda, right?
Yes, it's back.
So again, the first thing to do is to establish the horizon line. Again, it's easier when working from a photograph because the boundaries are established forward, which is fine. But if you look at this, you know, the horizon line is roughly, if this is the image or the drawing size in your notebook, then of course, the horizon line is roughly about 2/3 or 1/3 from the bottom up. Then the first thing we're going to do is this horizon line, and then we're going to start establishing the vertical for the corner of the building. Now notice that the dome is barely visible in this image. We're just going to kind of exaggerate that just to show that it is really Villa Rotunda for the namesake. So let's, you can see the full screen of the drawing board. Is that right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, so in your sketchbook, let's look at this carefully. Now, this is the edge of your paper, any size. I think most of you are probably doing 8.5 11, which is fine. So this will be the 11 dimension. It's the 8.5. So the first thing we're going to be doing is establishing the horizon line and, of course, the vanishing points. Okay, so this is actually the border of the sketch, just because we want to make sure that the vanishing points are outside the boundary of the drawing frame. So this is, of course, would be considered like a map around the picture frame. So I would probably roughly draw the picture plane inside about 1 inch away from the top and the sides. So let's take a look at the vanishing points. If this is the sketch, and roughly we're going to be looking at, I'm just kind of eyeballing. If this were half of course, the image, it's roughly going to be about 1/4 or 2/3, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. Then I would just put the horizon line roughly between, if this is 1/3, this center mark, roughly between the center mark and the third. I just would divide this, the thirds, the horizon line or the horizontal edge, of course, will be divided into thirds as well. We're going to be establishing the point of the corner of the building. And again, it doesn't have to be perfectly positioned like this. This will, I mean, since it's a free-handed sketch, you can use your triangle, then there will be some sort of, variables in the placement of these two edges. So I just kind of loosely put the horizon line a little above the third line between the half and the third. I just draw a horizon line, of course, across. It's interesting that that photograph is exactly the top of the plinth base and establishes the eye level in the horizon line. So roughly we're standing about, well, not about, but precisely at the top of the boundary of the stairs. Okay, so we're going to establish that first. Okay, so then the horizon or the horizontal will be established roughly between the thirds. So there again, the corner of the building can be placed a little bit to the left of the last third. And that's a very strong place to establish where the corner is among the horizon line. So I just roughly put the vanishing points, the right vanishing point, close to the edge of the paper, not the border. The same thing with the left vanishing point, close to the left edge. And I'll pause for a minute to let you have some time to kind of construct that, and I'll come back in a few seconds. You know, again, if you practice doing these, it will become second nature to just kind of quickly establish a 1 and 2 point perspective in your sketchbook. Okay, so an easy way to establish the boundaries of the box, but this is a little bit more complicated because Villa Rotunda has multiple projections in boxes. So let's kind of take a break from drawing from it. So obviously the plan of Villa Rotunda is a large cube with 4 projected pavilions, a north, south, east, and west, summer, spring, winter, and fall. Of course, the dome is at the very center, a circle. Okay, so now remember, our station point is over here. We're roughly looking at this corner. Here's the cone of vision. So when we start drawing this, remember the plan in classical architecture, there's always an even number of columns. And an odd number of spaces, because the center in classical Renaissance architecture is very symbolic and very important. So there will never be a column on the facade of the center of an entry. Of course, the door is here on each one of those quadrants. Okay, so just remember that when we start drawing the columns being foreshortened into perspective on the left and the right vanishing point section. Okay, so we do have the horizon line, the vanishing points, and of course, the vertical for the corner of the building established. Hopefully we've actually been able to do that so far. So let's do one thing. Let's kind of establish where the projected pavilions or the colonnades spring from. Because we can't, it's really hard to draw just the box because the pavilions in this particular view are covering up the corners of the actual cube. So let's do one of two things. Let's start with the entablature, where of course the cornice projects from. So roughly, if this are the vertical line, and again, what we need to do is figure out where the actual base of the building occurs. So I just would probably, you can clearly sort of eyeball these distances. You know, this is obviously about twice the size of the base. So I like to put little tick marks, and it's easy to work if you establish a center. If this is the center of the line, then it looks like it's half, 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 and then maybe a third. You know, and again, we're not really measuring the drawing. This is simply a free-handed perspective sketch, so you can have some liberties about the placement of things. So then just from observation, you can establish the vertical edge for where the projected pavilion starts from on the left side, on the right side. Now remember, the right side is more foreshortened because, of course, the vanishing point is closer to the edge of the building. So the right side is clearly more foreshortened than the left side. So obviously anything on the right side will be much shorter and compressed than anything on the left side. So then going back to our early lecture about making little tick marks, if you don't have a scale, then you can start establishing some of these different edges. Then, of course, where these corners meet, you will always project back to the vanishing point. Left, of course, and then the right. The same thing for the base. The way the building meets the ground will be projected back to the right vanishing point. Then, of course, back to the left vanishing point. What's interesting about this, if you work things out, this is not really intentional on my part, but you can see the corner of the inside corner where the pavilion meets the wall is roughly at the center line. Now, if it doesn't fall in that category, it's completely fine. It's simply just kind of a freehand sketch because, you know, to properly calculate the perspective drawing, if it was a hardline drawing, would take pretty much all day. This is very complex subject, but, you know, this is just, you know, quickly done in your sketchbooks. So obviously the projection on the right will be much more fortunate because look at the distance between the right vanishing point and the left. And I think I've given you a lot of information. I'll give you a few seconds to kind of draw in your sketchbook. So we're just really focusing on establishing this entablature and then where the pavilions project from. And if I'm going too fast, at least unmute your microphone and let me know. If I need to go back to some of the other details, then I'm happy to do that. Okay, so the next part is to draw the facade foreshortened in perspectival view. Hopefully this isn't too outrageously complicated to do, but if you've never drawn perspective before, this is definitely kind of a learning curve. But, you know, again, I simply just kind of drew from observation. You know, what you can do is you can follow the lines, the third marks here. You know, and this gives you reference points. A lot of students ask me, why don't we start drawing a perspective grid and follow that? Well, my answer is the grid is very confining and it doesn't allow for any sort of artistic interpretation. It is somewhat helpful, but it just gets to the point of following kind of a formula in a specific category where all these things fit. I'm just giving kind of a loose guidelines for where these objects sort of end. So I really don't like to use the grids or perspectival grids at all because they're very limiting. They do establish boundaries, but they're so tight that students get very intimidated and frustrated with them. So, and if you don't need to use these to draw this, that's fine. So if you look at this carefully, is that the center of the pavilion is roughly a little bit to the left of the center, I'm sorry, above the edge between, of course, the 1/3 and 2/3 mark. So then I just would kind of eyeball the projected colonnade on the left and the right side. What we're actually doing is drawing squares in perspective on the left across the right side. Now the diagonals determine the center of the square facade in perspective. Nothing there, and the same detail on the right. Okay, so next, let's kind of establish how the face of the plinth is established. So all you have to really do is connect the dots, and this projects out a little bit beyond the edge of the left colonnade. I would just project that back to the vanishing point on the left side, and then, of course, on the right side. So the same thing here applies so that we're actually going back and forth from left to right side. Then, of course, the face of the plinth block should probably be very close to the edge of the paper. So you just project these back to the vanishing point. This one is so close to the right side of the edge, it's going to be very, very foreshortened. So probably it might be a little bit difficult to show the right side. And then we'll just kind of draw a diagonal for the stairs. Of course, the treads and risers all go back to the vanishing point. Okay, hopefully everyone is on board with this. It's different doing an online class because I have no idea if nobody chimes in with questions or comments. I have no idea if I'm totally confusing the class or if everyone understands this. Now, if you look at this, just, being someone in the field of architecture like you should be, is that, the center line is accidentally the corner of the edge of the pavilion and, of course, the facade. But that was sort of unintentional on my part. If it works out like that, that's great. But if it doesn't work out, that's fine. It's still a very strong 2-point perspective drawing. I'll give you a few seconds to kind of get that resolved, because really we're just simply establishing the facades of the colonnades of porticos on the left and right side. Then we're trying to draw the plinth blocks. Okay, so next we're going to be showing how to properly draw the pitched pediments of course, on the left and the right side. How does that lay out in perspective? By now, if you start drawing the diagonals between the two corners, you can have the center, established here and of course here. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's continue the center up to the top. But let's look at this very carefully. It's interesting when you start doing these, well, depending on which view that you select or draw, is that it looks like the pitch of the roof is almost the same angle as the perspective of the wall that goes back to the vanishing point. The same thing here. You could just take this, the top edge of course, the cornice of the portico, and just project it out to the center without even worrying about what angle. How do you determine the angle of the roof in perspective? Really don't need to worry about it because it is so closely associated with the top of the cornice here that you can probably just either continue that line and then project down. And then this, if you look at this, I'll just project out the wall for the left side. So in other words, it's just going to be, the angle is going to be a little bit further below that. Then I'll just connect the dots. Then I just kind of eyeball the cornice of the entablature for the columns. I'm going to take a break from the drawing. I'm going to share the screen again. I'm just going to go back to the photograph. And can you see the photograph enlarged on the screen?
Yes, it's there.
Okay, good. Well, let's just kind of, take a look at some other details. We can go back and add the details in the last hour of the lecture. So what I'm showing you here is we can clearly see the 6 columns, the opening at the center. Of course, this is the ionic order with the volutes. So the next thing we're going to be doing is placing the arched openings and of course the pediments around the windows. Okay, before we do that, let's just kind of quickly sketch the 6 columns. I'm just going to turn this around for just a moment. And so here is the colonnade on the left side. You probably should have already established the center of the diagonals in perspective. The corners, of course, then I just would eyeball the 3. There's 1 here. Well, the entablature is really here. And then, of course, the columns 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I just always draw them tapering. Of course, they are tapering, but the sketch can kind of exaggerate things. They're going to be leaving some space in between because you're going to be showing the shade, of course, the shadows in between columns. And for the freehand sketch for the ionic column, I just like to show little dots here because, of course, it is a free-handed sketch that should clearly show the ionic order in a freehand drawing. You know, of course, if you're using an 8.5 by 11 sketchbook, it might be hard to show the detail, but you know, since it's just a sketch, you can quickly show there are 6 columns. And the part on the right, of course, is very foreshortened. It's really hard to see any space between the columns, but I just like to show little dots. Okay, so we're going to show the 2 arched openings on the left and the right side. So the first thing to do in an arch is to show where the spring line is. You can divide the vertical at this corner into thirds. And of course, project back to the vanishing point here, go back to there. The same thing with the one on the right, and this one into thirds. If you're very accurate about things, you can construct another series of diagonal steps to determine the center of the arch. And of course, that would just freehand the curve here, and then of course on the right. That. Then just graphically show the thickness of the spring line. Then of course, Palladio does express the keystone. I would just show that going here. What's really important is the wall thickness. So I just would just draw the thickness of the wall. You know, ideally, if you're hardlining this on a drawing table, these would all go back to the vanishing point. Okay, so at this point, for clarity purposes, what I would do is just to put some light shading in between the columns, if you're able to draw those. But in your sketch, if there's not enough room to show the shading, that's fine too. Just make them look like columns. So then to draw the windows on this, the left and the right side, I would just continue this. And then I would make that the top of the base for the pediment. So in other words, the pediment would be here. Now again, on the right side will be much more foreshortened, so these angles would be much steeper in this particular view. Then at this point, without doing a lot of careful measuring or calculating, I just would go back and draw some details for the windows. Always show the wall thickness. In classical traditional architecture, the walls are very thick because, of course, this is bearing the weight of the floors of the walls. And to make your drawing read clear, I would show shading of the actual glass. Then, of course, the other windows, the one for the basement is here. The same wall thickness continues. The same thing for the attic. So, of course, these edges go back to the vanishing point. And I just would show some shading for the glass. And the same thing on the right. You just would continue these corners out. And there was, of course, the ones on the right would go back to the vanishing point. Now keep in mind, in foreshortening, the part that's more foreshortened on the right, there'll be less glass visible than there will be on the left. Then, of course, for the openings in the base, we'll just continue these these edges down. And what's interesting is Plaudio at the base uses a segmental curve. The one above that is a true semicircular arch. And of course, I would just go back in and shade clarity. And the same thing on the right side. Okay, it's about 12:45. I think what I'd like to do is I'll give you some time. Let's take a break for about 10 or 15 minutes or so, and then we'll come back. I'll show you how to draw the background, the sculptures, the finials on the roof, and some other details. And this should be a nice perspective sketch that hopefully could turn into a frameable piece of artwork. So I'll give you some time to finish that up. It's 12:45. Let's regroup around 1. And are there any questions about the drawing or any comments? Okay. Well, the good thing about these lectures is they're recorded. You can go back and watch them again and again. So. Okay, I will see you guys at 1 o'clock. And also, if you want to email me your sketches, I'll type in my email address in the chat box, and then I'd like to see, let's see. We can do this at the end of the class. Okay, I just typed in there, and I'll see you in about 10 or 15 minutes. Okay, well, it's 1 o'clock. I put a photograph of Villa Rotunda there on the screen. I hope you were able to see that. So I think we're just going to finish some details in this. The first thing to do is kind of emphasize the cornice of the building. Just kind of make this look beefier. Then you're just going to finish the edges. Then the next thing is the sculptures that articulate the very ends of corners and, of course, the tops, the plinth of the building. So I would start off I just like to scribble just some, I'm not that great around sculpture, but if in an 8.5-11 sketch, it wouldn't be an information shot. Is to get the top of the sculpture, and then project it up forwards. That way, that would properly be foreshortened. The same thing with the ones at the top. And there is, if you look at this, a pedestal base. Of course, the horizontal edges actually go back to the vanishing points. I'll just establish that. And I just would kind of loosely draw them on the top. Then what I was saying is in this, we really don't see, because the dome and the roof is so shallow and Villa Rotunda, we're loosely looking at a roof that's might be roughly 22.5 degrees, a very classical roof angle. Then, of course, the Rotunda doesn't project as much as the one in the Pantheon in Rome, but of course it does have its own there. So I just kind of like to loosely shove it in as this kind of curve. Then Palladio does build the brackets underneath the cornice. Kind of loosely go back and draw those. Then, of course, to make the drawing a little bit more clear, I would go back and put shading in. You can clearly read the volume of space behind the columns. Then, of course, there are other windows that Palladio has established on here. There is a small square window. Again, the horizontal edges on the left and right side will always go back to the vanishing point. And I'll show the wall thickness. The same thing on this side. I think it's a window underneath the staircase. Then, of course, in the background, I would just show some trees in the distance just to kind of establish some contrast. And a lot of times I like to do either kind of a uniform grain, either a completely 90-degree vertical or a 45-degree angle. It makes sense to do the shading on the trees vertically because, of course, trees are vertically, not really horizontal necessarily. So then, of course, the other part on the right. Then I would start establishing some value for the sky. And since it's a sketch, it's perfectly acceptable to show construction lines. I think this drawing looks a little more exciting than it was just a perfect rendering. Of course, you could do the shading vertically done like the sky, so there's a nice consistent grain. So nominally, it's a little bit darker at the top and it's lighter at the bottom. Okay, so let's establish a light and a dark side. From the photograph, the sunlight is over here on the right. So the side on the right will have mostly sunlight on it. Of course, this will be, of course, the part against the sunlight. So we'll just have light shading again. If you want to use either a constant continuous 45 or 90-degree angle, that's fine to do the shading. Now be careful about putting shading and value on everything because there actually isn't. Now this is technically facing the sun, so the return on the window jamb will not have shading on it. The same condition here on the larger opening. Of course, the header or the lintel will have shading because it is the part against away from the sunlight. So of course, this plane and this plane will have the same amount of shading on it. The same thing with the stairs. Now these elements, the window jambs here are roughly in the same plane because of course they're facing the sunlight. You wouldn't put value and shading on that. Okay, it's really difficult to do the shades and shadows on curves, but there is a strange little shadow because of course the curve is in shadow here, so this will be shaded in a little bit. So then of course this part will not have shading on because it is facing the sunlight. The same thing with this part. So pretty much this entire plane will have value and shading on because of course it is away from sunlight. So then of course the portico that's projected will have a shadow on the main facade. So technically this is the part in shade that's lighter than the actual shadow because the shadow is the part that's cast from the projection. The shadow is technically the absence of light. The part in shade does have light in it because of course it is reflected from the wall plane in the front here onto the part in shade, not the shadow. So nominally you can draw the shadow always as darker than of course the part in shade. So that will establish an ultimate three-dimensional quality the way that these objects are illuminated with sunlight. So. Okay, so this one I'm just kind of going back and putting details. Then of course there is a shadow from the wall onto the stairs, a very complex strategy to draw. You can just quickly kind of indicate the shadow on, of course, the facade of the stairs. Then I'll add another window. Then ideally, to make the facade render with contrast, we'll put more value on the right side than, of course, on the left side. So that way you will be showing so by doing this will really project the facade that's illuminated in the front. Okay, so the other shadow will definitely be the shadow from the wall that projects out onto the floor. Of course, the shadow from this edge, of course, will go down to here and project back to the vanishing point. Then to intensify the depth of the portico on the right, there is the main entry door that's obscured by the shadows and, of course, the columns. And I would make that as dark as possible. Same thing over here, roughly at the center. Okay, I'll give you a few minutes to kind of put some more shadows and shading in this. Hopefully you're able to actually draw the entablature, because the columns never just go right up to the roof, the edge of the roof. So there should be a horizontal band of just where the columns die into. Okay, I'll leave this up here for a few more minutes. Okay, it's 1:20. We have a few more minutes. I was going to show you just kind of some regroup about kind of how to approach this subject. I gave you about 5 more minutes to, well, you can actually have until 2 o'clock to get this finished and properly shaded. And then I'll just kind of show you just kind of a regroup of what we learned earlier today in the class. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take this down in just a few seconds. Okay, so just a few things to remember when constructing the 2 points. You know, always establish the horizon line first, where that falls. And to really draw just the basic elements of Villa Rotunda, I did say that you could start establishing where the corner of the building falls, then your vanishing points, left and right. Then you could first establish a cube or a box. Then, of course, you would just kind of eyeball the boundaries of the cube and then establish the center where the pavilions meet the wall, because the 45-degree diagonals, actually the diagonals determine the center, because you really can't measure the depth at all in a perspective drawing. You can only measure in a 2 point the height of things. In a 1 point perspective, you can measure the length and of course the height. But in this particular view, you really can, because these 2 planes are very foreshortened. Then of course you can establish the cornice or the entablature, the band that goes around that always goes back to the vanishing point. And of course, we're just going to be drawing the pavilions. Okay, so I'm just kind of going back to how you actually construct this again and again if you wanted to redraw this. You pretty much have the entire boundaries of Villa Rotunda drawn. And you just project the wings out for the stairs. Okay, so on and so forth. Okay, well, we do have a little, about 30 more minutes. I do have a cat that likes to help me draw when she does. But do you guys have any questions, or do I need to go back to the video and then go back and rework some parts? Or
Looks great. I put in the chat. If anyone does have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat, or you can unmute and ask them. Otherwise, we'll just keep on going.
yeah, well, I think we have about 30 more minutes. You can, chat, or you can ask me questions. I always think this takes longer than anticipated, but there's some really very simple tricks draw a very complex subject. I would just be careful about it's good to know the cone of vision and the station point are really important, because this is a very disadvantageous perspective drawing to do, because of course the two sides are way too foreshortened. Because of course the problem is you're standing too close to the building, of course, or structure. So this is station point A. This is station point B. This is actually the same drawing technique you're doing interior perspective. You know, we did an interior perspective last week, or the sort of the Palladian arch as a colonnade. But then, of course, you can do the same thing for an interior one point. You can do this. At the boundary, just establish the horizon line, the vanishing point on the left, the right, the same thing. You just would essentially draw an interior, a 2-point perspective interior. You can go back and draw a fireplace. So to draw these are bookshelves, you would just draw the bookshelves that always go back to the left vanishing points. You know, these could be French doors that go out. Yeah, so the reason sometimes the interior perspective are a little bit difficult to draw, because if you're drawing furniture, then it's really for beginners, it's very difficult to properly foreshorten furniture and tables. It would take us all day to kind of properly show that. I just thought drawing an object or the structure would be a little bit easier today. Of course, you'd have your fireplace there. Draw a couch. Once you start adding furniture into the center of things, it makes the drawing a lot more elaborate, complicated to do. It's still effective. It's the same perspective drawing technique we did here that you could use for interiors. Now, to lay this out, especially the height, if you had an interior elevation, you could just get the dimensions for the spring line, the center and the height of the ceiling, and then just start with here and project back. So, because you can't really measure and plan either of these dimensions, the one on the left, of course, the one, because they are so foreshortened. It's the same thing on the front facade. You can't really measure the distance of the facade. You can only measure the height at this point, because by the time this starts going back to the vanishing point, the dimensions and numbers start to change. Then, you know, to finish off the drawing of Oliver Town, I just would like to, you know, you can draw dots for the gravel. It's also interesting, the landscape for Italian architecture, you know, they really don't put shrubs around the baseboard to what's called soften the building. You know, that's a very kind of American terminology, to put shrubs potentially soften the architecture, but of course that doesn't really work. The Italians have their own sort of ideology of landscape. Okay, so I think, well, I'll give you the remaining 30 minutes to finish up. And then I'd like to see your sketches. I think, I'm not sure how many people are still left in the class. I think it looks like there's 4 or 5, but I'm always for a teacher to see what the students' work looks like. You're more than welcome to email it. You can actually upload it here on the chat room if you can.
Yes, there's the little file button in the corner if anyone is able to upload it, or maybe, you know, snap a picture on your phone or something to send via email.
I'm going to change my screen again. I'm sure probably most people have seen this building class. Can you see the full screen of the photograph?
Yes.
The photograph is a little bit different than what I was drawing, is because just for the sake of the drawing, I like to intensify the shadows. You can see the shadows are different in your sketch than they are on the drawing. But just aside from that, Palladio's architecture, it's interesting what Palladio does with the columns on the facade. A lot of people would, it's hard to transition from the columns to the return as a facade. Normally people would have columns, but Palladio stops the solid wall and breaks to have a special corner just for the columns. It's really interesting the way he does these things. And also, you know, Palladio was technically considered a modernist at this time during the Renaissance. He did reintroduce a lot of ancient classical ideals, but you know, it's interesting that the facade doesn't just completely show every classical order in detail. There's parts where the wall surface is treated as a plain element without any decoration at all. And then of course we see most of the detail, the decoration is around the front porticos, which are emphasized. Then of course the cube is de-emphasized with, so in other words, he's not showing decoration on every single surface. I think that's what's really interesting. Also, there's not a profile or molding around all these openings. It looks like this entire thing was cut out of a solid block of stone, especially the way the openings, or it's almost like somebody took an axe or a chisel, just carved out these openings in a solid block. Of course, that's really not how they're done, but it's really nice to see, especially the way that the base is done. And so sorry about that. So then of course, the building actually starts from the bottom, the top of the plinth. But of course, it's interesting, he leaves off details and articulation on certain parts of the walls. And also, I thought this is such a great photograph to choose to teach people how to do a 2-point perspective, very dramatic view, especially the shadows. And of course, the fact that the horizon line is at the very top of the base, or of course the top of the plinth where the actual building actually starts. Yeah, this technically ends the online drawing seminar. We'll talk about, we're going to be going back to our history classes. I think we'll have Byzantine architecture. I haven't seen the list yet, but in August, so we won't have any classes in July. So this really ends the drawing seminar section of the class. And we'll start our history lectures, I think August the 3rd. But for the rest of the class, we have about 20 more minutes. Let me check my email and see if you have any other. I'll go back and change my screen. You can see the sketch. There, I think hopefully you can see that, the sketch in full screen. Are you able to see the sketch as a full screen image?
Yes, yes, it's back to full screen.
And then I guess I'll give you about 20 more minutes to finish, and then we can review your sketches if you've uploaded them here. I'm not able to see the sketches on this end, but okay, I'm gonna move the sketch in about 5 minutes. There was something I'm gonna show you. Again, these tutorials are really primarily suited for, freehanded sketching. You can use your triangle to the perspective. There was a very sort of tedious way to properly draw perspectival views without, relying, this is before we had computers. It was very tedious, but very exciting and very frustrating to, I'll just leave this up for a minute. Before we leave the class, I was going to show you what's called the plan projection method. And if anyone in the class has actually seen how this is done, it does provide some very accurate results on foreshortening, but it is very time consuming and demanding to do. But now when you're using Google SketchUp or any sort of 3D software, everything is already, the vanishing points horizon is already established for you. It's really easy to do that. But before, there was kind of a very difficult way to calculate. I'll show you in just a minute. I think I'll give you about 2 or 3 more minutes to look at this, and then we'll shift gears. Hopefully I can see some of your drawings. think I might have lost my place. Can you still see the sketch for the Villa Rotunda?
Yes, all
Okay.
good.
Okay, good. I'm just going to show, this is really important to know, just because it is so easy for the 3D software to do this for you. What you would do is it's called the plan projection method. You would have your plan. I'm just going to just create something just to kind of prove this example. You have the floor plan of your building or space. Then, of course, you would actually have your drawing paper here. Then what you would have to do is create the station point, the picture plane line. Like if I want to do a 1 point of this floor plan, of course, you'd have to figure out where the horizon line is, of course, the center, the station point here. This, of course, is the station point. Then you have to manually calculate how these things are properly foreshortened. This is just a quick example, but it was very tedious and laborious to kind of do these, but it provided some really exciting and very accurate results. In other words, you would take this line here in front of the cone of vision, the picture plane, then you would project back to this line. It would properly, I'm not doing this assignment justice, but then you would properly project back to the points and then draw the perspective from there. In other words, you'd have to have 3 different systems. You'd have to have the floor plan, the picture plane line to properly foreshorten. You have to project back where all these corners are, and then it would properly foreshorten the actual box. Or you can see that it was very tedious to do. And I'm not doing this justice, but before we had 3D software, this is how you would properly draw a hard-lined 1 point perspective drawing. But for us to do this in a class, it would take you several days. I used to teach this a long time ago. It would take us a week to do 1 perspectival view, just because there's so many different parts to properly show how to foreshorten the actual chamber of the box in perspective. So now, with just a few techniques I'm kind of graphically showing you, you're able to do a convincing perspectival view, just with kind of a few simple moves.
Oh, Jay, one of the participants has said that he had to jump off, but thank you, and he'll need to go back and review later, but this was very helpful.
Oh, good. I hope so. Yeah. So then I guess, since this is recorded, it's edited, and the other people that couldn't make it to class can watch it and draw it on their own time. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think we have, are there only 2 students left?
I believe so. I think people might have had to jump off.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yes, but anyone who's missed it will be able to go back and watch.
Good. Well, I think it's almost 1:50. I think we can go ahead, and if there aren't any questions or comments, I haven't gotten any, we can go ahead and end the recording session. Just as a closing, I still would like to see some student work. You're more than welcome to email me your sketches on your own time. I'd like to take a look at them. And then we'll rejoin for our history lectures in a month in August. And if there aren't any other questions, I will see you in about a month, and good luck drawing and sketching.
Great, thanks so much. And Hill also says thank you.
Okay. All right, good. All right, thanks again.
Great, thanks. I will end the recording now.
Okay, bye.
Great.